Welcome back to the ETSI IQC Quantum Safe Cryptography Virtual Executive Conference. It's time now for our panel discussion on the public sector perspective on quantum safe cryptography. Now, the advent of quantum computers is an issue for governments who not only need to be ready themselves, but also need to ensure that industry and other users are fully aware. So, how are governments preparing for quantum computing? And how do they see their roles as customers, regulators and advisors to industry? To find out, let me first introduce our guest speakers. Bridget Walshe, Director General Secure Solutions and Services for the Government of Canada. Dan G, Mathematician with NCSC for the UK Government. Dr. Manfred Lochter, Mathematician with the German Federal Office for Information Security. And Kevin Stine, Chief of the Applied Cybersecurity Division at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Welcome everyone. Now, we know that governments have a wide range of responsibilities. There's national security, but there's business and the economy, there's technology, there's education and so on. But when it comes to quantum safe cryptography, where do you think governments should be focusing their efforts? Manfred, let me ask you that question first.
Let me first thank you for having me on the panel. It's always a pleasure. So we are moving to quantum safe cryptography because there's a quantum threat. So we know that quantum computers are coming. And from our perspective, we expect them to be there within 10 years or so. That means cryptographically relevant quantum computers. And that means we have to prepare now. The only viable solution that exists is post-quantum cryptography. There's a NIST process going on that we very much appreciate. We have learned from our industry that they need guidance earlier. So we gave them some guidance. We chose two very conservative algorithms and we got very positive feedback. So they now know where we are going. The other option is, of course, quantum communication. Quantum communication is an alternative, but at the moment we don't see it as mature. There are many open questions. Nevertheless, it's important research topic. We should do more experiments. You will see some experiments from Germany soon and demonstrators. And if you are asking about the government role, maybe the picture is a little bit broader because we have not only the quantum threat, we have opportunities from quantum technologies. There are many applications that may come with quantum computers. So our goal, or the government goal at the moment, is to generate a kind of quantum ecosystem that brings research into products.
Thank you, Manfred. And Bridget, where do you think governments generally should be focusing their attentions?
Yeah, so I think I definitely agree with a lot of the points that Manfred raised. And I think what really I see is the fact that governments have this very long history in protecting sensitive information, building secure solutions using cryptography. And also, I think a history of looking to sort of say, what is the horizon on how to protect those things into the future? So there's a couple of pieces that come out of that. One of them is on the education side. So one of those pieces is on the fact that because of this history, I think governments have a big role to play in working with others to ensure that the information that is out there and the experience that we've had is shared. And the other piece, I think, is on that history of protecting things for a long time. It means that we've gone through a lot of different transitions in the past. So I think governments have a role to play in working with industry and I'll say levels across government sort of globally to say, what are the pieces that we can do and understand when it comes to transition? If we've worked to transition from one type of cryptography to another in the past, what are the lessons learned? But most importantly, as we get toward quantum transition to quantum safe cryptography, what are the pieces that we can extrapolate from those who transition early and provide guidance, pointers, lessons learned to those who are running through that process?
Thank you, Bridget. Kevin, let me come over to you on that one as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for including us. Definitely agree with Manfred and Bridget. I think, from our perspective, that I think the primary government responsibility is really that promulgation of the quantum safe algorithms and really the standardization process, and kind of supporting that, working very closely with our colleagues, around the world. Certainly, the education and the timeline are critically important, and I think the transition as well. We're spending a lot of kind of time and cycles and energy focusing on how do we help organizations prepare for the quantum transition, the PQC transition. In fact, we just had a workshop within the last few days really focused on that topic and trying to get a lot of good considerations from the user community, if you will, on how to best prepare for that. Like Bridget said, we've been through transitions before, and we've learned a lot through those. I think we also have responsibilities for kind of helping to plan for the support for network protocol and cryptographic libraries and applications with respect to testing and validation as well of future implementations. And then certainly, as was mentioned, kind of that support for developer and user implementation of the algorithms is going to be critically important. And I think a role the government has to play a strong involvement in.
Thank you, Kevin. And Dan, do you have a view of where government should be focusing their efforts here?
Thanks. There's lots of good points been made so far. There are, understandably, I think, some misconceptions about quantum computing and about the threat that it poses to cryptography. And I think there's some misconceptions about the possible solutions as well. So we have a really important role to play right now in helping people to understand what that threat means to them and what they need to do about it.
Now, yesterday's conference theme was quantum safe cryptography as a key to economic prosperity in the quantum era. I'd like to ask you all now, if I could, how you see the economic benefits of quantum technologies. Bridget, what's your view?
So I think it's an interesting problem because as the focus of this discussion really is looking at the threat that quantum technologies and quantum computing can pose to cryptography, obviously there are two sides to the story. So when I look at the investment that's occurred in the past 10 or 15 years in research, especially into quantum computers, it's been enormous. It's been huge. And so from a certain perspective, that is bringing forward this amazing scientific research that will definitely have impacts, especially when it comes to things like data science and what we can do to analyze large amounts of information. So that has economic benefits, both for those who are working in the industry developing those computers, but also for those who use the results and who benefit. So industry looking at large amounts of data to understand how they can better gear their business, huge social implications, which obviously also have economic impacts, looking at research into genetics and other pieces that have spin-offs in healthcare. But there's that other flip side to it that we look at, and that's the fact that frequently with any major innovation, there are risks that come with it. And so we're discussing and looking at that impact that quantum computers have on cryptography and in turn cybersecurity. And from that aspect, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to address that threat. It does mean that for those who are invested in using communication systems, which is virtually across the board these days, that impact really comes into play in the fact that they need to budget and plan to upgrade and update equipment. But it also does come with the opportunity for those who are developing secure communication systems, for those who do research in cryptography, for those who help with the transition in deploying new pieces of equipment and kit. So from that perspective, it's an interesting piece to look at to say, yes, there is a big expense involved in this. Mm-hmm. Yes, there is an enormous risk to society if we do run into a situation where quantum computers do pose a threat to the communications we're using today, but also need to look at the opportunity that exists both in terms of innovation in those new technologies, delivering the services that that will be required and are required to update to new secure communications, but also from the side of things saying that there is an element of starting fresh, right? When we're putting a lot of new technology out there, as we will be in updating to new quantum resistant algorithms, there's an opportunity for a lot of industry innovation and development to come out with products that both address the quantum threat to cryptography, but also provide new services that we may not have been pushed toward had that threat not existed.
Great. And Kevin, do you see economic opportunities for new quantum technologies?
Yeah, I'm not sure I could add too much more to what Bridget said. Definitely agree with those points. I think, beyond those, I think we definitely understand the role of quantum safe cryptography, and certainly how organizations are dependent upon cryptography for many of their business operations, kind of maintaining that integrity of their business operations today. So I think the only other point I would add is that, the quantum cryptography, post-quantum cryptography, is going to really provide that critical role that's going to play an important role in maintaining that business or that economic prosperity across all those business operations, again, that are dependent upon cryptography today.
And Manfred, anything you'd like to add there about the economic benefits of quantum technologies?
Yeah, I think agree to what I've heard from the others. As every new technology, you have constructive sides and you have destructive sides. At the moment, from BSI perspective, you have of course we are working to counter the destructive sides, but overall for society there will probably be more benefits. It's not just having quantum computers and finding new materials, being able to do computations that were not possible before, but there are also other things like new sensors that you can use in medicine and many other applications. So overall, I would see it positive.
And Dan, is there anything else you'd like to add about the economic benefits?
Well, there's been a lot of focus on quantum computing as a disruptive technology, which is entirely understandable. But I think we'll see perhaps more immediate benefits, particularly economic benefits, from other quantum technologies, such as quantum sensors, quantum timing, and quantum imaging, as these things have really important applications in so many different areas, from healthcare to geology to construction to navigation and all kinds of things. So in the UK, we have the National Quantum Technologies Programme, which consists of 4 hubs that are responsible for developing and commercialising different quantum technologies. We also now have the National Quantum Computing Centre, which is looking at all aspects of quantum computing. So I think it's well understood that these technologies have the potential to bring huge economic benefits to a wide range of areas.
Dan, let me stay with you for this next point, because I want to look at how government can assist industry and what role that should be on helping them to plan their transition to a quantum safe infrastructure. How might regulation or certification or evaluation schemes, how might these ideas help make the transition to a quantum safe infrastructure more straightforward for companies?
I think it's important that government provides really good advice and good guidance. So we need to ensure that people understand the threat and what their options are, but we also want to avoid making costly mistakes, as we know from experience that migrating to new forms of cryptography is extremely challenging. Now, you mentioned regulation and certification. I think regulation can be useful, but it makes more sense for some areas than others. So critical national infrastructure is a good example where it makes a lot of sense. But I think that good standards and good certification and evaluation schemes will help by ensuring that people have access to high quality products. But I think it's important to remember that it's going to take time to develop those standards and those evaluation schemes. So we don't want people to jump too soon.
Bridget, how do you feel about the role of standards and regulation and these evaluation schemes, and what governments can do to assist companies?
So in a lot of ways, I'd echo those same comments. I don't think that anybody can understate how important it is to be using cryptography that has been standardized, that makes that feasible for certification, and that has been well tested. So again, completely agree with sort of the point that rushing into things can lead us to a state where cryptography may not yet be certified and can pose risks to the users. The other piece I'd note is while absolutely regulation makes sense in certain places and in others it's more difficult, certainly there are spaces where there are government regulatory bodies that already exist in places like critical infrastructure. There are spaces in industry that self-regulate, and there are other parts of industry that have no regulation at all, and things still seem to manage to function. So I think it really does sort of depend on where and what outcome you're looking for and how critical that particular piece of the communication technology is. That being said, I think there's a role that regulation can sort of play when it comes down the road that's beyond the standards piece. And that's pushing toward transition, right? So I think we've seen many times as different types of cryptography have aged off, as we've noticed risks to using certain other pieces of crypto, thinking of the transition with hash functions in the past. Getting people to complete transitions can be tough. So thinking down the road, one piece that I know standards bodies have been looking at, and maybe it's a place for regulation as well, is pushing people toward end dates. I don't think we know exactly when. We can say right now everyone should have transitioned to quantum safe cryptography, but certainly in the future we'll have a better idea of that, and a point where I think that we can push people to move away from cryptography that will be aging off and will need to age off.
Manfred, what's your views here about how governments can help industries in this transition?
Yeah, I in some way would like to echo what the others have said. We see it in one example, and that's QKD. People are trying to roll it out, and there are at the moment no evaluation criteria. So BSI tries to develop evaluation criteria together with ETSI, and I'm quite sure it will take some time to have them in place. So it seems to be premature to roll out large networks, which are quite expensive, instead focusing on developing secure solutions.
Kevin, anything you'd like to add about the role of government here and the thorny issue of regulation and also standards?
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, certainly NIST is not a regulatory organization, so I can't really speak to that piece. But certainly, I think we're all right to focus on the need for guidance and assistance in terms of transitions, kind of the algorithm transitions. And like I mentioned before, we're spending a lot of time focusing on that. In fact, we just had a workshop within the last couple of weeks on preparing for post-quantum cryptographic algorithm transition. So I'd certainly encourage everyone to take a look at that once that's available online. I think on a broader scale, we can provide algorithm standards, we can provide support to standards developing organizations, and then also provide the standards, the guidelines, kind of the other technical resources that can help organizations with their prioritization and kind of the sequencing of their migration from current public key algorithms. And I think we also should be giving a high priority to the development of kind of guidelines and automated test tools to help with the testing and the validation of the quantum safe algorithms and modules as well.
Kevin, this is advice for governments to assist industry on its transition, but what about the requirements for government services? Are these requirements any different from those of business and industry?
Yeah, I think there are actually a lot of similarities between government industry requirements. Look, both government and some industry process national security information. Both are responsible to different degrees for critical infrastructure operations. both conduct financial transactions, financial operations, and the disruption of any of those could have catastrophic consequences. But I think there are some key differences. The differences exist, differences in requirements rather exist more with respect to the consequences of an adversary's exploitation of quantum vulnerable algorithms. I think there are differences in the means for enforcing conformance to government generated requirements between government and much of industry, and certainly among various industry sectors. And maybe finally, the economic consequences of implementation overhead, and I think this has come up in some of our discussion before, as potentially a greater impact in the case of many of the private sector organizations. So certainly something that we're very conscious of.
And Bridget, do you echo the views about how government has its own unique and different requirements, obviously sharing similarities with industry, but another layer on top?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to, I think, looking at, for example, the motivations, and actually maybe come back to that point on regulation, there are certainly similarities and differences. Government, I say government self-regulates, that seems funny, but government certainly does even internally set policies and regulations for themselves, just as industry does. I think that looking back toward that point on national security information as well, that is held both within government and within industry. But even when we go beyond thinking about something like national security information and just even more into protecting private information of individuals and the responsibilities that from a legal perspective an organization might have, while some of the reasons for protecting the information might be different, some of the needs and requirements for protecting information might be similar. So for example, when we talk about national security information, frequently we're talking about protecting information for a very long period of time. And it also may be the case that when somebody is looking at very personal information like health records and that sort of thing, there's also that need to protect over long periods of time. So I think that when it comes down to it, the operating environment and some of the consequences may end up being different, but a lot of the approaches and the things that people may need to look at can be quite similar.
Great. And Dan, any additional thoughts about the requirements of government services and how they may differ from those of industry?
Well, I think a lot of it's been captured already. There are things I could say about scale and about reputational issues when it comes to government, but I think those things are also important, or should be important, to industry. I think Bridget's highlighted that one of the main differences is that government has, in many cases, highly classified information that needs to be protected for many, many years from the most determined and well-funded adversaries, which is generally less of a concern for most business and industry. But I think that as the world continues to become increasingly connected, government, industry, and academia are going to have to work together to protect people from cyber attacks and abuses of new technologies. So I think the differences are going to become smaller and smaller.
Thanks, Dan. And Manfred, would you like to add anything on the subject of government services?
Yeah, maybe one point. So there's one difference, and that's the origin of products that we are allowed to use. If you are protecting critical national information, you usually require the products to source from Germany or the EU, or if it's for NATO, from a NATO country. So there are restrictions on the supply chain.
Moving on then, and Manfred, let me stay with you. Let's move on to research areas where governments and the public sector should be looking at. Do you think there are any important quantum-safe cryptography research areas where the public sector should be sponsoring more research?
Well, I can only talk for Germany. And for Germany, my impression is that there is probably enough money. We will soon have a Corona recovery package, which will probably contain money for quantum research. it's more complicated to bring different areas of research together. If you look at it, you have different communities working on different aspects of quantum safe cryptography, and sometimes there's no deep understanding on what the others are doing, and there we need more coordination. And this may also be again a German problem. We have a problem. We are not very good in bringing research results into products. So my overall view is we have good research. There is probably enough money for research, but we need to concentrate on the ecosystem.
Thanks. And Dan, from your experience in the UK, are there any quantum safe cryptography research areas that could do with more public sector sponsorship?
So I think the NIST standardization process has stimulated a lot of good research on the theory and the mathematics of quantum safe cryptography. There's always more that can be done, but clearly good things are happening in that space. So I think the big questions for the public sector and for business and industry in general involve implementation and migration to quantum safe cryptography. We know that it takes a long time and that it's extremely difficult to introduce and move to new forms of cryptography. So if we take, for example, the ongoing efforts to move away from using the SHA-1 hash function, I'd argue that migrating to quantum safe cryptography is going to be far more challenging. So I'd urge caution against moving too soon, but I'd encourage people to start thinking about how they're going to carry out the migration once standards and high quality implementations are available. So I think people need to start considering how their systems are going to be affected, where they need to make changes, and how they'll ensure continuity. And that will require experimentation.
Thanks. And Kevin, given your experience at NIST, are there any research areas that you think the public sector should be looking to do more and give more support to?
Yeah, I'll definitely echo Dan's comment on kind of research around implementations. So I mean, thinking about how do we optimize implementations or kind of conduct those impact assessments on existing protocols and applications like TLS and code signing, for example. I think beyond that, sponsoring research on vulnerabilities associated with the implementation of the new algorithms that are going to be in the context of different uses or different purposes is going to be an important area of continued research. And then finally, like I mentioned before, kind of the development of automated tools that'll help support testing and validation of the quantum safe algorithms that could be operating in different modes or for different applications as well. This continues to be an area that's ripe for a lot of kind of cool and innovative research opportunities to really influence and inform future activities.
And Bridget, any areas of research that you think government should be sponsoring, given your expertise here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with everything that's been said so far, but I think two things that I might highlight. One, when it comes to the implementation side, so how to transition, ensuring that those new implementations as these algorithms and protocols make their way into products don't have vulnerabilities. I think I would highlight that as being a major space. But what I would add to that is the fact that investing in that type of research beyond the what is the math and is the math that sits behind these secure, but more into that space of, are there vulnerabilities? What are the best practices associated with implementing and bringing these things into the real world? I think that that's something that is absolutely necessary right now, but also necessary for things beyond sort of that quantum transition. So research that could pay really big benefits just in the space, and observing the fact that we've got such an increased reliance on cryptography and its applications. So really see that as a big benefit. The other piece that I'd say is that turning to something like the NIST competition, and it is incredible to see how many people are conducting research at the same time, and just given the fact that it's so open, there tends to be a lot of coordination. But at the same time, as governments, as we are prioritizing research funds, etc., one piece that I think is really important now and will be moving forward in other spaces is that we're coordinated, both in terms of making sure that we cover that space very well because it's so broad. It really has become kind of a global research initiative, but also I think just to be sure that we hit both, turning back to the early conversation, both those aspects associated with security and the economics as well.
Manfred, you mentioned QKD earlier. Where do you see QKD contributing to a quantum safe future?
I would say, if you are talking about QKD, most people focus on the application for key distribution, but QKD is just a part of quantum communication, and the research itself is quite important, and you will be able to use the research results of in other areas of quantum technologies, especially when it comes to the research on quantum repeaters. Direct use at the moment, I would say it's more for point-to-point connections within towns, within military organizations, but I don't see a wide deployment. But we are seeing lots of experiments, and this may change over time. And this is the fiber-based QKD. The satellite-based QKD is something different. They usually use entangled photons, which has they can go farther than 80 and 100 kilometers. There are projects on, but for us that's not the focus at the moment. For us, it's we are focusing on the security of the proposed QKD schemes.
Where do you see QKD contributing to a quantum safe future?
Yeah, so as Manfred said, quantum key distribution, sort of falling underneath that broader spectrum of quantum communications, is a very important research field right now. It's something that within, I'll say, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and sort of the broader government of Canada, that we are looking at and investigating and funding research with academics to sort of understand it more, right? To sort of know, okay, this is a very cool, promising technology that when you look at the physics and the theory sitting behind it, provides a lot of security, but the implementation details, as always, are so important. So it's really difficult to say right now exactly how the technology of QKD will be used in the future when it comes to contributing to that overall environment of communications technologies that are resistant to quantum attack. But at the same time, I think we really need to be thinking about the steps that we get to make those understandings. So right now, we in Canada are investing in research to understand, what does this look like from a practical nature, right? We're at that point right now where there are implementations that aren't ready for prime time security yet. We don't understand, and I think it came up earlier in the discussion, we're not at the point yet where standards exist, where we can certify equipment and understand and trust for security. But we are at the point where we can see, okay, how does this work? If I look at quantum key distribution equipment and use it within a network with traditional cryptographic protocols, how do they play together? Is it going to be just point to point? And I think tied with that, a lot of still research going on those basic fundamentals on the implementation. So right now, I think it's tough to say what it will look like. I think it's an interesting, promising technology, not ready for prime time security, but may have a role to play as parts of networks in the future.
Thanks. Well, we are approaching the end of our discussion, but I do want to get a couple of questions in before we have to close. I'd like to ask, and Dan, I'm going to come to you on this one first if I can. What have we learned from the technological progress in this area? For instance, the NIST process or claims regarding quantum supremacy. What have we learned, and what has really surprised you most in recent years?
So I think the NIST process has reaffirmed my belief that cryptography is incredibly difficult. I don't just mean the mathematics, I mean all of it, from the abstract theory to producing secure implementations to integrating those implementations into existing systems. All of it is extremely difficult. With respect to quantum supremacy, we're seeing some really exciting and impressive developments, but it's also clear that there's still a long way to go before we'll have scalable, fault-tolerant quantum computers. And I think it'll be really interesting to see whether people can find ways to use noisy quantum computers to achieve significant speed-ups over classical computers. But for problems where it's easier to assess what people are referring to as usage, and where hopefully we can make practical use of the results. What surprised me the most in recent years, I think the explosion of new ideas and techniques in cryptography, and old ideas finding exciting new applications. So it's actually really an exciting time to be a cryptographer.
Kevin, do you echo that? Exciting time to be a cryptographer. I mean, we've seen a lot of progress, still a lot of work to be done. What's really surprised you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's an exciting time to be a cryptographer, and I also agree that cryptography, is challenging for sure, and that's why it really takes a community effort. I think we've been there's continued to be progress on quantum computing. I think, but nothing has necessitated us to move up our timeline through the NIST process. I think that surprised us a little bit. But we're in a good place, I think. I think with respect to the algorithm selection and standardization process, we're really excited to have so many promising algorithms that can really plug into most applications with good performance. So I think that's been something that's been real gratifying as well.
And Manfred, what have you noticed at the moment? What has surprised you in recent years?
What surprised me most, how people changed their minds over the last years. When 2015, the NSA came out with this warning, many people said that that's just nonsense and don't believe it, nothing will happen. And at this point in time, we started a discussion about a hybrid approach, so use old and new crypto together, and we need cryptographic agility in our products. And in 2015, people didn't want to hear it. And now we have 2020, and people think that's common sense and it's accepted, and that's changed quite quickly.
And Bridget, we've seen a lot of progress, still a lot of work to be done. It's exciting times. What is surprising you now?
So definitely echo everything everybody else has said. And I don't know if I'm entirely surprised, but maybe would want to note and sort of highlight just how impressive it is to see that while cryptography is hard, while implementations are difficult, while there's all this work to be done, it's been incredible to see that by having sort of a single focus with the NIST competition to get prepared from the algorithm point of view, and seeing the standards community pull together to start looking very quickly in parallel at a lot of those implementation pieces. To me, it's that speed with which we've been able to respond. Especially when this is something where spending a long time, having a lot, I mean, you trust crypto when a lot of really smart people have tried really hard to break in and they can't. So really the ability sort of globally to pull everybody together and do those evaluations so that we can build that trust very quickly has been amazing.
Great. I have a final quick question for everyone. As we wrap up this discussion, I'd like to ask what your quick take-home messages for governments and policymakers. If you've got any advice how you can sum all this up as to the advice you would give to governments and policymakers. Bridget, could I start with you?
Sure. So I'd say there are three big pieces. The first is understand the landscape that you're working in. What are the systems that you have that are going to need replacing when it comes to becoming quantum safe? The second would be to understand and to plan for what that life cycle looks like, right? Is there a big budget investment? Do you need to do it early? Are there things that you can do to make it as smooth as possible and be ready to go? And the third piece I would say is that education aspect. Make sure that you understand the threats, the risk, and the environment that you're working in. And for those who are responsible for larger organizations, prioritize it within your organization to ensure that those who need to know have the information they need to do that planning and understand our landscape.
Great. And Manfred, do you have any key messages at the end here for our audience of policymakers?
So let me try. So I believe quantum computers are a threat, and that it's absolutely necessary to migrate to quantum-safe solutions. But on the other hand, quantum technologies are an opportunity that we all should embrace.
Thank you. And Dan, a key takeaway for our audience?
So I'd echo the points that have already been made. I think it's important for people to understand the threat, to consider how their systems are going to be affected, to consider where they're going to need to make changes, but not to jump too soon, to wait for the standards and the high quality implementations to appear.
Thank you. And Kevin, a final comment from you. Any take-home messages about this to governments and policymakers?
Yeah, I think a few things. Look, keep the focus and the attention on this. This is a critically important area, not just for research, but really the current open and transparent process that we're running, that standardization process. It really requires all of us to be engaged. And we've been thrilled with the participation so far from diverse stakeholders all around the world. So please keep that up. I think preparing for the transition, we got to continue to focus on that. And we're trying to do our part, certainly working with all of you. And I'd say finally, look, it really does come down to trust. And I think both through the process that we're trying to run, as well as the resources that all of our governments and industry are trying to produce, is really about cultivating trust in the algorithms and trust in the use of those algorithms to protect our data and our information and our business processes across government and industry. So just keep the attention and the focus.
Thank you very much. Well, that is all the time we have, unfortunately. Great discussion. Thank you all very much indeed. We will be back soon with our next panel discussion, which looks at the challenges of moving to quantum safe technologies. And don't forget that if you missed any of the presentations and panel discussions from day one, you can view them online on demand right here on the website. Thank you again to our panelists and to you for watching. Goodbye for now.